I was in a game like this with an SEC and a Big Ten opponent. I really believe it'll come down to you need to see the first 10 to 15 plays. Michigan's first 10 to 15 plays, you'll get a feel of whether they can push them around up front a little bit, whether it'll open things up for Hassan and Blake.
Come, they told me, our newborn king.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. We know what you want under the tree. We're ready to get things underway. We bring in Brandon Justice, the recruiting editor of the Maize and Blue Review, and he's decked out. If you're listening on the podcast, he's decked out. He's got his Christmas sweater on. He's got a Santa Claus hat that's mesmerizing, as I told him when he came on there. It's got jewels on there that light up. It's sweet. What's up, Brandon?
How we doing? Happy holidays, everyone that's watching or listening or wherever you may be. Yes, the hat. I felt it was a nice addition to today's show. You told me to get a little Christmassy. I said, I don't have an ugly Christmas sweater. I don't know if you would call this an ugly Christmas sweater, maybe.
Not
but
nice Christmas sweater.
I don't have an overly ugly Christmas sweater, but I have something Christmassy all the same, and I wanted to undersell and over-deliver, so I hope I've done that for you.
You have. This sweater has been in my family, I don't know, say generations, but I thought like it was the same front and back, but it looks like it's on backwards, but I don't think it matters. You got a duck and you got some hearts and you got some other ducks. I think it qualifies.
Oh yeah.
As ugly Christmas sweater. So, and it was real. It wasn't made. It wasn't knitted to be an ugly Christmas sweater. It was knitted for, love and the holidays, I think. So
right.
Here we go. So that's all good. Well, we're going to talk about two of my favorite things. Michigan football and Michigan basketball. So let's get going here. Let's start with football, the Orange Bowl. A lot of different newsy things going on 10 days out. But, the first thing I wanted to ask you is the line in this game started at 7, it moved up to 8.5. That seems high to me. But what about you? What do you make of the 8.5 point line for Michigan and Georgia?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially as we draw closer. I thought for sure this was going to be something that opened up at that large 9.5 number we saw it at firsthand. And I thought as the days got, closer and the weeks got closer, that would just gradually go down. Now, all of that being said, there's still so much to see with this game as far as the injury report. Obviously, we are living in different times to where an injury report doesn't necessarily mean a bodily harm injury or a physical injury or an in-game injury. Obviously, COVID is going to play a role. We've seen it with JT Daniels, who now reportedly could be out for the game, the quarterback for Georgia, one of the two. So it'll be interesting to see what shakes out there. I think right now they're all just kind of waiting and seeing what happens there. And any sort of movement is just kind of, I don't know, grain of salt unless it starts to really, really open up. But sitting, where are we at? A week out, about 10 days. 10 days. So, with that being said, I think you really start to see true indicators within that first 7 days. So once we get within a week, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But what I'm really interested to see is what happens next Wednesday as we kind of loom closer to it, because those closing days are always what matter most with these lines. So you could see it swing as much as, crazy things have happened with lines before. We've seen them go from, 9.5 where they're at, 10 days prior. And then on that second, maybe 1 day beforehand, a number of things could happen to move it 2-3 points. A number of things could happen to flip it on the opposite direction. If there's like a quarterback injury or whatever happens, that's not going to happen. That might not happen in this situation. But there's just so much time that it's hard to really gather a lot from that line right now. The obvious dialogue is that the SEC is overvalued, or you can say the SEC is properly valued, however you want to see it. But the obvious indicator there is that they think that the SEC's best is unquestionably better than the Big Ten's best. And it's not like Michigan got in there on a fluke. They were unquestionably the best team in the conference this year based on their little end of the year run. So it's just, that's what we see. That's what that line tells you, is that Vegas values the SEC far more than the Big Ten this year, especially Georgia.
Yeah, that was Bill Benner that started us out. That's Brandon Justice that's talking right there. You mentioned I'm no sharp or a big-time gambler, but it doesn't make any sense to bet the game right now. You better wait till New Year's Eve, and it's 10 days if you count today. And you mentioned it's not good online. It's not good for sports talk. Maybe you could say it's good, but people have a hard time talking about COVID or Omicron or whatever else. But, you mentioned Daniels. Also, there was a report, a Dog Nation, that George Pickens, their wide receiver, had to get tested as well. That same Dog Nation just came back a few minutes ago and said that Pickens was tested because he was in close proximity of Daniels and that he had a negative test. So stay tuned on that. I was looking at the SEC protocols. Depending on when, Daniels actually, if he was showing symptoms and if it was like yesterday or the day before and it was just announced today, there is a chance that he could play in the Orange Bowl. And with Michigan, we know the news is that they're all 100% vaccinated, and they're all like, and I don't know if a team unity, I guess you could say that they're all getting the booster, together. I think that's happened today. But whatever the Big Ten's protocols are, I would have thought that they're, that they've thought about it. Like, hey, shouldn't we test everybody like, yesterday, just in case you get that positive test where you may have a chance to, even if you have the positive test, a chance to play. But I don't know. They haven't talked about that, but I would have thought, I'm sure that they have considered it, considering what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point, you can argue that their strategy with, and I know that I should preface this with that they're doing it because that's what the university, tends to represent, so, but I do believe that for this team, tactically speaking, by this team being fully vaccinated, you go to sleep with far more peace than if they're not, if you're the head coach or if you're any coach for that matter, or a player, fellow player, whatever it is. Because, hey, at the end of the day, what matters more, right? It's going to be, living more than playing in that game. And I feel like if they are sleeping peacefully knowing they're all vaccinated, then at the end of the day, they're going to be winners anyway in their minds. Not to dwell too much on that, but
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say I could, come over the top and say, look, maybe, since the weekend, they should have shut everything down and got themselves in a bubble and not talked to anybody and, just stayed in, that team bubble. And, it doesn't look like they did that. But, hey, that's me from afar saying, hey, just be super, super cautious. And even if they're being cautious or just playing it by whatever the university guidelines or the Big Ten guidelines, it's easy for me to say, yeah. Don't see your family. Stay 6 feet apart. Right. And, Jim Harbaugh, don't go see Frank Gore in a stadium and, don't wear a mask, all those. It was easy for me to say that. But, they didn't. We'll see what happens. You hope they're staying safe and you hope they're all able to play.
Yeah, I mean, you just hope for, you just really hope for both sides and for all four teams left that you don't have to look back at this college football playoff and wonder what would have happened if everyone was healthy for every team, right? And injuries happen, but this is obviously far different than that. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, the end all be all is you hope everyone's healthy for their own sake, for humanity's sake. But you do want to, from a football perspective, not think about this as like the COVID playoff that was so greatly affected by it. So, and we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, this whole thing is, day by day and unpredictable, and we don't know. You could do everything and still, end up in that side of things, or you could do nothing and not end up. I don't know. We're going to see what happens. But yeah, I mean, for the sake of looking back on this, like without any asterisks, you really hope that they're all able to stay healthy.
Well, you can't do anything about that. I do know over the last 24 or 48 hours, whether you're watching football, the NHL is pausing, the NBA is putting in rules. You can bring guys up for the G League and back and forth. And you look at the amount of players and coaches that have to sit these out. And, thinking about, well, Michigan will be fine. They're not going to lose anybody. I don't know if that's real. Right. It doesn't sound realistic, but I don't know. Maybe they will. I'll be fine. And, then everybody will play. But like you said, we don't know. You're hoping for none of that. And just, 9 days, let's go. Let's get it going. Well, I don't know. If Michigan, not to be negative here, but if Michigan did lose the game, I know because I just, talking with some friends of mine, that some of them are like, I'm just happy to be here. Give me a chip in the chair, those kind of things. And then my one friend said, if they lose, it's because of the recruiting. And, Georgia's so great. And I just looked, over the last 5 classes, if you rank, and Georgia had 3 number 1 classes, and this is from rivals in 18, 19, and 20. their ranking for the last 5 years, 2.2, where Michigan's at 12. I mean, it's a pretty big gap. And do you think that is the narrative if Michigan loses, whatever it is, that's like, hey, it's recruiting? And on top of that, do you ever think like that Michigan can recruit like Georgia recruits?
Yeah, I think the NIL finally gives them a level playing field in that regard, and I won't go too much further into that, but I think that that's going to help them out. And so in the future, we'll see what happens with this NIL deal, because I think that Michigan is a school that has the alumni network, and they have the funding as is in regards to those kinds of things, where they have so many available opportunities for the NIL. And even if they're not coming directly from the university, the amount that they can outsource is just incredible. It's on par with any university in the country, I think. Maybe like a school like Miami, who has this ultra athletic, funding coming with new AD and all that, maybe more so than Michigan. And they're obviously far more desperate to get back into things athletically. So you might see that school take a higher rank. But other than that, I mean, Michigan and its alumni network and the amount of opportunities it has to network with its student athletes and those folks are, it's endless, right? So the NIL is very intriguing because I think that that's going to not only level the playing field for college football, but Michigan and schools in the Big Ten, even if you hate Ohio State, Ohio State's recruited really well without causing much harm in that regard before the NIL. They're going to be elevated now, even with it. So it'll be interesting to see what the Midwest is able to do to compete with those schools down south in this NIL thing. Now, as far as recruiting goes in this year's playoff, yeah, I mean, Georgia has been on another planet recruiting. I mean, they got 5 stars this year by rivals. So, I mean, and I don't think they finished first. I think Alabama did. Obviously, there's another signing day left, but, at this point in time, they're still second despite having 5 stars. But if you put those two classes next to one another, I'm probably going to take Georgia's because it has 5 absolute game records, right? And an absurd secondary class. And Michigan's is extremely good, but Georgia's is better just because that's how they're recruiting on a different planet in comparison to these other schools. And it's not just Michigan. I mean, you want to put Georgia and Cincinnati next to each other. You want to put Alabama's recruiting class and Cincinnati's next to each other. You want to put Notre Dame's and Cincinnati's next to each other. Go ahead. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's football. When you are playing as a mid-major group of 5 school who is like a 6-6 team and you're going up against Bama, sure, like you're going to get absolutely wrecked just no matter what, more than likely, unless it's some sort of miracle. But when you're at that point in time where your recruiting class is finishing, 10th to 12th, like Michigan's traditionally has over these past couple of years on average, but with classes like this year's that finished higher and 2016 that finished higher, the gap isn't as wide. I mean, the 10-1 is a huge leap because that top 3 is typically a lot different than that 4 through 10 mark. But I don't think that it's this grand difference that decides if you're going to win in the playoff or not. I don't think that you lose in the playoff because the other team recruited better. You made it there for a reason. If you get blown out, then sure, maybe. It's all case by case though. Clemson and Ohio State in 2016, I think, 38-0. Clemson's recruiting classes weren't like absurdly better than Ohio State's. Ohio State had out-recruited them. Clemson it had been a back-and-forth battle. It had nothing to do with it. They blanked them 38-0. So if we're going by that, I don't know who said it initially, but if we're going by that criteria, then Clemson and Ohio State in 2016 is probably the one rebuttal that disputes it all, in my opinion. And I think that if Michigan goes out there this year and loses by 8 points to Georgia, which is not to spoil anything, probably going to be my prediction, then I don't think it's a difference in recruiting. I mean, yeah, they think that they're better, they're a better team, but I don't think it's all afforded to that. They've fielded all of these recruits. They've held on to them. They haven't transferred. They've created a culture at Georgia. They have very, very good coaches that always, seemingly every year, are taking better jobs as head coaches elsewhere. Sam Pittman at Arkansas. Now you got I can't think of his name, Lanning, who's going to Oregon. And, that is starting to be Kirby Smart's starting to become like a subsidiary tree to Nick Saban's tree. So, they've got a really good culture at Georgia of winning football games despite not winning the big one yet. So I don't know. I think you can definitely say that 1 to 3 recruiting class ranking average is a difference maker, and it's a lot different than 4 through 10. But I don't think that you're not playing one recruiting class versus the next one on the field. You're playing a collection of all. and your transfers and all that considered too. So yeah, I mean, recruiting can be attributed to that, but I don't think it's the absolute answer.
It's good stuff from Brandon Justice. You know, you mentioned Kirby Smart. I don't do an impersonation of him, but I've got my headset on, and I feel like, you know, he's always, he's getting after it. I know Harbaugh does.
He's an interesting cat.
Gyrations, I guess. Arms are definitely flap. I don't know if there's anybody that's hotter or waving his hands more than Smart there on the sideline. Oh, you teased your prediction a little bit. I was looking at all of the college football playoff semifinals, and you mentioned that one blowout. I don't know if I don't know what the line was in that game, but I was looking and I didn't necessarily see any like big dogs jumping up. It seemed like the favorites pretty much. It's been a chalk overall. There might be one in there, like you could go to that Oregon, Florida State. I don't know, or the one you were talking about, but for the most part, man, it looks real chalk and a lot of blowouts.
Yeah, and that's what makes me start to come to terms on what I think is going to happen in this game is that, history tends to repeat itself when it's done it year in and year out in this setting and in this format, and it continues to happen. And, it stinks, but it looks like Alabama, Georgia is probably going to be what happens. And a lot of people down south are going to love that. And pretty much everybody up here is going to hate that, I would say, besides maybe Ohio State fans who are just they're rooting for Cincinnati. So maybe they'll hate that too. Yeah, I just think it's one of those things where you tend to have that argument, like, do we really need a 12-team playoff if every year we have seen 1 versus 2, or if it's not 2, it's 1 versus, it's Ohio State wasn't chalk when they were a 4 seed, but that's a few years back now, right?
That's the first one.
That was the first one, right? So ever since then, we've seen chalk. So it'll be interesting to see if they do this whole expanded playoff thing, if by the third year of it, they're like, oh, wait, every year it's the same thing anyway. Why don't we put the rest of these teams in relevant bowl games, or which you got to create the relevance for those again. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that's what started to make me think about this whole thing a little bit closer, is because of how, the better teams traditionally have won in these formats, because there's no letdown spots in the college football playoff. There's no such thing. You're typically going to get the most out of each team. I mean, you're going to see them at their all-time high in preparation, their all-time high in game mode, their all-time high in freshness, because they've had the weeks off that they've had. So there's really no letdown spots. There's no teams coming off of a bye. There's no teams. If you're overconfident in the college football playoff, you're poorly coached as is. So that's where that comes from, and that just hasn't happened either. So, and I know that's not going to happen with Kirby Smart. So that's what started to your point about it, is what started to make me think closer about this whole thing and start to come to terms, like I said, on this probably being a Georgia win by around 8, in my opinion.
Turn off that Christmas lights on your head. The Maize and Blue review, holiday edition, heading up to Christmas. And then, of course, New Year's Eve still ahead. We're going to talk a little Michigan basketball. We got a Michigan recruiting spotlight. We've got a Memorabilia minute for you. And now I'm going to throw you a curveball, Justice, because I didn't tell you that I was going to talk about this, but every day this week, and here we are on Wednesday, so I haven't been that many days, is I've been going back and doing a year in review of Michigan football style. So I started with the first 2 games, Western and Washington, and then yesterday talked about Northern Illinois and Rutgers. And today I wanted to look back at Michigan's first 2 road games, and it was at Wisconsin and at Nebraska. I'm not doing too much of a deep dive here, just what you remember about those games and what happened. Michigan beat Wisconsin 38-17. It was only 13-10 at the half. Wisconsin, and as much as we talk about Georgia's run defense, Wisconsin statistically has the best rush defense in the nation, and neither Haskins or Corum had 50 yards against that Badger defense. And the biggest play to me, though, is Michigan was I remember they went for it on a 4th and a foot from their own 34. They went for another on that first drive, 4th and 1, and didn't make it. But then they kept going to the run so much, they did the flea flicker to Cornelius Johnson. That wouldn't be the first one that they tried this year. And it was like, blowing up the top, they took the top off the defense. And considering it was so ground and pound, and I know they had a long one against Northern Illinois, but, that seemed like it tapped into something, and certainly a big play, which has been a hallmark of this Michigan team. But that's what I remember about that road trip to Madison, coming out and being able to beat the Badgers definitively at the end, 38-17.
Yeah, and that was the game where I think this team really established its identity and like let everyone know who they were going to be, how they were going to play. That was the road test. That was the first one, and we saw the jump around from the third quarter going into the fourth quarter, and you saw the energy of that bench, and you saw the energy of just that team in general, taking over the stadium during jump around. And that was when we knew, like, okay, yeah, this team is a lot different than most Jim Harbaugh teams before it, and they are loose, but so prepared that it doesn't matter because they're able to do these things. And what happens as soon as it's over? I mean, that was a strip sack the next play. As soon as the jump around scene had ended, the very next play, it was a strip sack. So, or it might have been a second play or whatever it might have been. Either way, you saw momentum swing happen because of their energy. So a lot of times in sports, you can see energy really play against you. You can get so honed in on just playing as high energy as possible that you forget your X's and O's, and you forget the value of playing smart. And Acuna, of course, is making his appearance with his loud meows. So you forget these things, and when you do, it typically doesn't go your way. So it was good to see Michigan play this extremely high level of energy and see it play in their favor, because that at that point in time against a team like Wisconsin became their identity. Was they were going to be the jump around, the pump it up, all those songs, the Mr. Brightside and all that. Their bench was going to go crazy. They were going to throw the towels in the air, and Harbaugh was going to have his fun with it. And you think back to that Washington game where they just ran it down Washington's throat over and over again, and we all looked at it like, what is happening? And you looked at the energy that was in that game, and not only in the big house but on the sideline as well. You looked at that as just like this isn't going to play well against Ohio State. This isn't going to play well against Wisconsin. This isn't going to play well against the Penn State. That's not going to happen. Were they ever going to evolve, and yada, yada, yada. And then you look back on that game like, okay, maybe that's the game that established the identity. And Wisconsin was just kind of like hey, this is for real. This is going to work. This is what we're going to do all year. And then, the later in the year, they were able to do those same sort of things against the big dogs. And we saw this team's identity kind of culminate, and here we are. So that's what I take away from the Wisconsin game, was when they really put on display, like, hey, this is what we're going to do. Because not only did they, have that energy from an X's and O's perspective, like you said, their running backs who had been their bell cows up until that point, and they had rode those guys through, besides the Northern Illinois game, they were able to get away from that and get to the flea flicker and get to some of those designs that they were running. And, Wisconsin fought back. You think about that halftime score, Graham Mertz, like as time expired, you're like, oh, here we go again. Michigan didn't hit the gas when they needed to. Second half, Wisconsin's going to come out and play their game. And, we're toast. That's it. The game's toast. Not the case, obviously, right? I mean, the second half they took over, because that was another thing that I really thought was special about this team in comparison to past Harbaugh Michigan teams is they didn't the second half, they owned the second half. The second half was theirs, and that you couldn't say that prior.
Except, and I think Acuna is anticipating who let the dogs out coming up from the Orca band, maybe on New Year's Eve. It's interesting you say that about the second half, because Michigan wins that game by a field goal at the end. Brad Hawkins comes up with the strip. This is the only other. If you're just joining us, we're not going game by game. We're just talking about two of the games, the two road games that came consecutively, Wisconsin and then to Lincoln, that night game against Nebraska. It was just 13-0 at the half. But if you remember, 22 points were scored by the Cornhuskers in the third quarter. And maybe Michigan fans that are watching this said, yeah, hey, I thought Michigan had a chance. You kidding me? Everything was good. I was thinking, like, you know what? It was the first time they'd given up a lead, and it felt like, that they weren't going to win that game. Now, Nebraska's had their own troubles, and in the end, Corum came back and did the corn eating, and they were able to make big plays, and they won that game. And like I said, Hawkins made that big play, but so I guess you can make a case that they were a second half team in there, but they weren't a third quarter team in that particular game.
No, not in that particular one. Yeah, no, that was, maybe a better way to phrase it was that Wisconsin game was when they really showed that adversity was something they were going to be able to battle back from, because in the past we had seen them fold so often when they had leads and lost it. And if they were to lose the lead, there was no coming back. in years past compared to now, at least against better teams or teams that were perceived to be on the same playing field as them. And we saw this year when they were, punched in the mouth against Ohio State early on, when Ohio State regained that lead, you thought, okay, here's that slippery slope, because every year this seems to happen. Michigan will jump out to a lead, and then Ohio State will just, punch until the round's over. Well, we saw them come back from that. We saw them, like you said, against Nebraska. We saw it against Penn State, especially. So they didn't come out in the Michigan State game, but they certainly punched back in that Michigan State game the same way that they did in those other games too, despite losing that one. And, the same can't be said about a big playing field against Iowa, because they just kind of rolled out there as well. But again, like, that game seemed like the culmination of all of these games you're mentioning kind of come together. And I think that Wisconsin, Nebraska, that those moments right there, those, you can look back at those now like, okay, that was a huge part of this season, despite everyone kind of looking over the Wisconsin game at the time. Number one defense in the country now. They're rush defense in the country now. You look at that Nebraska game. You're like, okay, we knew Nebraska was scrappy. They had just scrapped with Michigan State, but, ultimately their record stunk. But we all know the story with Nebraska. They were in every single game historically, broke a record for losing barely, or whatever the record is. I guess you could take some pride in that. I think those two games really were like, okay, now we know what this team is going to be, because they did the same thing in that fourth quarter bridge at Nebraska too, where Nebraska was playing, I think, Thunderstruck or whatever it was, and they were doing the same thing that game on their field that they were doing at Wisconsin. So that's when you really knew that this team was not your typical show up they showed up in the workman's blue collar shirt, but they were a little bit different than the ones of the past that showed up in them, right? They weren't so much so all business and business only. They were all business with a lot of fun and some energy in there as well. And I think those were the two games that really established that identity. I mean, arguably those were two of the more important games of the year for that.
I'm with you on that. We're looking at the feedback here. Antoine with a series of points. I'll read them, and then you can tell me what you think. He's saying, you won't have an upset with only 4 teams. The more games you play, the more chance of an upset. It gets the fans and the teams a chance to take part instead of playing meaningless bowl games. He adds that the only people that don't like expanded bowl games are the elite teams, because they have a lock on recruits, and the chances are they're going to get to the bowl game. I think that was the same point. And he said it's crazy to him that you have over 100 teams in college football and only 4 spots to win a championship. So there you go. Today, you may not have known this, but it's not happening all the time. This is a palindrome date, 12/22/21, and that means it reads the same forward and backward. I thought maybe it would look better this way. I should be able to throw these things up on the screen doing it this way, but it's working this way. So there you go. You a fan of palindromes? It's not going to happen until 2030. So remember the day, Justice. And
wow. And I was
not going to happen for a while. So
I was blessed and honored to be on Afternoon Live during one of them too. I'll be able to look back on that.
Yeah, it's not quite Haley's Comet, but it's gonna be a while before it happens. Well, let's get to some recruiting here, and it's a good time to do it because you are the recruiting editor at the Maize and Blue Review, and I was looking, as I do now a lot, at the Rivals rankings, and they've got the, you just put to bed the 22 class, and now you look ahead to the 23 class, and it's no surprise Dante Moore, the quarterback out of Detroit, he's up there. He's ranked pretty high, I think 13 when you look overall. But there were 2 other players from the state of Michigan that made the top 250 from Rivals. One, a defensive end from Cass Tech, Jalen Thompson, who came in at 168 and ranked 187. And I know that there'll be a lot of adjustments as they move on through the year. Cole Dellinger, he's an offensive lineman, a guard out of Clarkston. Would you say that Michigan would be in on both of those guys? Any interest there? Any mutual interest when it comes to those 3 players?
Beginning with Dante Moore, right? Yeah. So I mean, Moore we've covered at large, and if you don't know who Dante Moore is by now and you're sitting at home, you're definitely going to do some reading up on him. because that's the number one target for them, regardless of class. I mean, I think Moore has been the most, besides Will Johnson, the most important part of Michigan recruiting for the next couple of years, including the 2022 class. Probably Will 1A and Dante 1B. I mean, the difference is Dante is a quarterback as opposed to Will being the corner that he is. And with that in mind, you probably have to say that Dante could have a bigger impact on the program as a whole, or, in victories, whatever. So that's probably why he would rank, maybe higher than him. But yeah, Dante is as big as it gets. And I think that Michigan ultimately lands him at this juncture. Things are fluid, things change every day, and I'm in no place or anywhere close to putting in some sort of like future cast or anything. But Michigan is the perceived favorite in that one for obvious reasons, because the relationships he has and the amount that he hears from Matt Weiss and he hears from Harbaugh. They're recruiting him as hard as they're recruiting pretty much anyone that they have recruited over the past few years. So, and the other two, we're just kind of waiting to see how much they're going to prioritize them. Jalen Thompson's a kid that out of Cass Tech, Michigan obviously just missed out on Deion Walker, who went to Kentucky. So now you're starting to wonder, Cass Tech had this new staff come in. Thomas Wilcher goes to Michigan State, who was the former head coach at Cass and was the primary contact for Michigan for a long time when he was at Cass, was not responsible, but obviously was around during the times that Donovan Peoples-Jones went to Michigan and Jalen Kelly Powell went to Michigan at the time. Obviously, Michael Onwenu, a few others along the way as well. So you start to wonder if the new staff at Cass, maybe the connection isn't as strong or whatever it may be. I don't think it necessarily has a whole lot to do with it. Cass Tech hasn't had the same worldly success that it was having when it had those guys before. I think that is more so a byproduct of the talent they had at that time, and that 3-year span was pretty generational, and it's going to be hard to repeat that for any school. And that's not coaching, that's just pure, who we have coming through. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Thompson. I love him as a recruit, and I think that there will be some prioritization there from Michigan's side of things. And the defensive lineman that he is, they're going to prioritize it. Obviously, Michigan relies a ton on its defensive line to get to a point to where it is with the guys like Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, Kwity Paye, list goes on. So, and then what was the third? I'm sorry, I just rambled and forgot.
Cole Dellinger, the offensive lineman from Clarkson.
Yeah. We'll see what happens there. I don't have a ton on that yet. I know that he is not a super high target at the time being, but they just lost out on the kid who went to Northwestern. So it'll be Dylan Senda from Divine Child. So they just lost out on him. So, and he's more of a center, a true center. So you might see Dellinger get more prioritized because they lost out on him. But I don't think that really has an effect on one or the other because they play two different positions on the line. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't. I just think that they're at this phase now where we are in between, like traditionally Michigan is recruiting like crazy right now because it has the time to. Right, they're bowl prepping, but they're not bowl prepping for a college football playoff. So the recruiting side of things doesn't just get left where it is. And Michigan, don't get me wrong, they're still 100% recruiting right now. They have a department for that for a reason. However, you're preparing for a college football playoff right now, and you're celebrating Christmas and the next few days. So some things are just a little bit more important than that right now. So I don't think that they're going to land any 2023 guys until after the new year. And it'll be interesting to see when those visits start to happen for the unofficials start to happen for the 23s and what kind of momentum they can gain. Now, granted, the National Signing Day on February 2nd allows them to still grab some 2022s. So, maybe they're focusing on a couple more there or what have you. I mean, obviously Connerly is a big deal. So if they land Connerly in 22, with Gentry coming in, now all of a sudden it's like, do we want to take Dellinger? Or how hard do we go after Dellinger? Do we go after Dellinger and only take Dellinger? There's a lot of questions that start to surface with or without Josh Connerly, while also still considering Gentry, along with Connor Jones and Alessandro, Lorenzetti, whose name is incredibly Italian and I can never remember it.
Awesome.
So, That's my synopsis on those three. I honestly think that they need to prioritize the middle there, the Cass Tech kid. And I think that, that's a difference maker for them because recruiting the defensive line is so important for them. But nothing in this class, nothing in last year's class, nothing in next year's class is more important than Dante Moore.
Well, you're the expert. My angle on Dante Moore is that Michigan's had a little bit of a run and success with Moore. Sharon Moore, Joe Moore, the offensive line coach, and now, hey, why not Dante Moore? Let's go. Moore is better. So let's go for Dante. Antoine's asking one more question. He's got a specific one for you, and this is not, I guess you could put it in the recruiting realm. Talking about the center from Virginia transferring to Michigan. And I'll add something, and I know you usually don't go into this area, but I was looking on Twitter last night, and somebody was talking about the center from Virginia, and the point that this guy was making is that the center had liked a number of things on Instagram over the last few days that Michigan had been posting. So I don't know. That's not some inside scoop. That's just out there, but people do pay attention to that kind of stuff. Do you have a feel at all that whether Michigan's going to be able to get this guy from Virginia or if he's going to stay right where he's at?
Yeah, right now, Michigan's side of things is extremely confident that they're going to land Oluwatimi, I think is how you say the last name, Oluwatimi. And what a monstrous pickup it would be should that come to fruition, given that Vistardis is going to move on the center this year. And he was incredible. And you see what that anchor in the middle of your offensive line can do for you, the leadership. You bring in a guy like Oluwatimi, who is immediately going to, I don't think he personally is going to do this, but you can't be an offensive lineman in that group and not immediately respect him, given that he was a finalist this year for, I believe it's called the Remington, but there's just so many awards. I can't remember the last names, but he's a guy who comes in as one of the better offensive linemen in the country. And arguably the top transferring offensive lineman. I think the Frazier kid from Florida International might have been more coveted because he had more eligibility. But Michigan is in this space now where they are going to expect themselves next year to be in the same spot they're in now, a college football playoff. And a big part of getting there is picking up pieces like Oluwatimi, who comes in ready and you can plug and play him. And he's arguably better than the guy you had there last year that carried your offensive line and was the captain of the ship in Vistardis. So, yeah, I think that Michigan's side of things is extremely confident in landing him. Maybe there's a delay in what goes on with that announcement. Maybe there's transferring to think about it. If you're transferring from one school to the next one, it's a process. You don't just call up admissions like, hey, I want to transfer, and then get your credits and your classes that day. Like it takes a minute for those things to get approved, and you don't want to announce anything until it's official. I don't think that you're even able, you might be able to as a player, as the recruit, but I don't think anybody can until then anyway. So you might have some of those things going on. I do believe he ends up at Michigan. I don't believe that anything has been signed and delivered just yet, but I do believe that Michigan has the right, legitimate, I should say, confidence for good reason to believe that they're going to land him inevitably. And then Josh Henschke, our Supreme Leader, was all over that one as well. And you can check the Wolverine Den for his updates on that. He was far more involved with that process than I was, and has a lot of good intel regarding that situation. Yeah,
Henschke, he'll be on the Den probably making an update right now on that. And you just said, I cringed just for a second when you said admissions, because Michigan's admissions, man, they go over that thing with a fine tooth comb and they end up kicking some stuff back. But you know what? That's okay. It's a great university academically and everything. You're not just letting, golf or something, those credits transfer.
Right.
You're going to look at them a little bit closer. Well, we have two things. We have 1 minute for some memorabilia. But before that, I wanted to ask you about Michigan basketball. Yesterday's game against Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne, or whatever it was, or Purdue, Fort Wayne. I don't think you have
the house that Tanner Wooten built. That's where he grew up.
It was COVID issues for them. But if you go ahead and I give you these next 5 games, and if I ask you for a prediction, Michigan, the day before, it's the 30th, the day before the Orange Bowl, Michigan will be in Orlando to take on the Knights of Central Florida. So that's their next game and their last game of the year. Then they have to go to Rutgers, who beat Purdue. Then it's 2 home games, Michigan State and Purdue, and then at Illinois. So those are the 5 games. Do you think they can? I think they need to win 3 of those, considering that MSU and Purdue are both at home, and you can't lose, all of those games. And, Rutgers is tough. It almost seems like Central Florida to me, and I'm not trying to, delay or anything here, but, Central Florida and Rutgers almost seem like they're must wins. And, MSU, Purdue, and Illinois, I would say at Illinois, they're probably not going to win. So they need to definitely split those games between Michigan State and Purdue if they sweep Central Florida and Rutgers. Having said all of that, how do you think they'll do in those 5 games?
Yeah, we're singing a different tune than we were in the preseason, to say the least, with this team, because
yes,
I remember when somebody asked if you're like, oh, I bought tickets for, this game and that game, and I didn't buy them for Michigan State and whatever. And we were just going on about, well, Michigan State's a great rivalry, but Illinois will be more of a factor into the conference. And we were thinking for sure Michigan would be at the top. And now you're wondering, can they beat Rutgers on the road, which is definitely a credit to Rutgers because they were able to beat Purdue, who is, unequivocally better than Michigan right now. And so, you wonder if they can repeat that success against Michigan again here next week. And I mean, shoot, it's hard to say one way or the other. That one's probably more of like a 2.5, 1.5 line. I don't know whose favor is going to swing in. And then you talk about Michigan State, and they've been playing. They're kind of in the opposite realm of Michigan, where they had low expectations and they've played particularly well. Whereas Michigan, who had those ultra high expectations and were thought to be a really safe team to predict to play as well as they were thought to, has been on the opposite side, being a huge disappointment. So it'll be interesting to see after this long break that they've had, where they're kind of not doing what, because you remember, man, they were traveling to Vegas to play Arizona, and then they were traveling back and playing Tarleton, and then that game ended, and they're playing, against whomever. I mean, and then Arizona's obviously turned out to be pretty good too while we're talking. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see with a little bit of a normal schedule for them, if that plays into their favor a little bit, because they were a little bit around the world and back in the beginning of the year. You've had a ton of time to figure things out with the rotation. You haven't had a lot of gameplay to figure it out, but you've had a lot of time to maybe see some things. So we'll see. Dante Jones played really well finally. You hope to see that replicate itself over these next few games, because hey, he's got to be your guy, because if it's not him, it's time to move on now. You can't go into Big Ten play with point guard questions if you're Michigan. It's an offense like most basketball offenses. I don't know how to say that. Sorry, I'm not a basketball expert. Most basketball offenses rely heavily on their point guard, unless you got Kate Cunningham at the point. So Michigan's not running a stretch forward at the point. They don't have a guy like Caleb Houston is capable. I don't think that he's settled in yet enough to do that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think Devontae Jones, if he can come into his own, I think Michigan's in a good spot again. All of a sudden, they're going to compete and potentially win a couple of those games you named off. But until we see something that makes us think, because he put up 102 points against Nebraska and then dropped a dud the next, 2-3 days later, whenever that was. So against Minnesota. Anyway,
that was a dud.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, and that was coming off a 102-point game. So it's hard to get really excited about what Devontae Jones was able to do against Southern Utah when they've just been inconsistent, and they are not convincing us that what they are doing has any sort of replication to it yet. Every game's been different from the one before and different than the game after it. So you just hope to see this team kind of complete its identity here as it starts Big Ten play and gradually come into its own. And like we said, there's been a lot of time for them to do that. Not a lot of gameplay. So we'll see if maybe UCF's a good tune-up and then you get a nice win at Rutgers. So all of a sudden you're rolling 3 wins and you go into Big Ten play. That's what you'd like to see. I think they win those first 2 and they're dangerous. They lose one, could be a slippery slope, man. Honestly, this is a toss-up of a season right now.
All fair. I think what you had to say there. Very fair. All right. We've come to the last minute of the TMBR Afternoon Live with Brandon Justice, holiday edition, heading into Christmas. You got your flashing. Do you have a piece of memorabilia that you can show?
Give me 2 seconds. I got to run to my table and get it.
All right. Go ahead. Take your time. Let's bring in Acuna. It's the real holiday spirit. You got some eggnog. You've got something, nutmeg, cinnamon. You've got anything, get some Christmas gifts wrapped up that you want to show. I'm all for any of that. Candy canes. I had a big Santa Claus that I was going to bring up myself and put it right here, but it looked kind of, I was thinking it might get kind of creepy. And then my wife said, you look like you got a lot of junk back there anyways. So I didn't go that direction. While I am here, I can tell you that you can look on the Maize and Blue review here where the show is posted, and I asked for some questions if people wanted to.
I don't know if I've showed this one before.
And now here comes Justice back. I was hoping that he was going to have a white beard on.
Yeah, that'd have been nice. All right. Up first.
Oh, we got multiple ones. I like it. All right.
I brought two. One's much more important than the other, but the other's a little bit of a throwback. So I thought I'd let everyone know that despite my age, that I do recognize the 90s and the 80s that came before my time. So we got Mahomes, PSA 10. Yep. And it's a win it. Nothing special, just a little insert action from Mosaic last year. It's not like a rookie or anything. If it was a rookie, it wouldn't be here. I'd be selling it. I can't keep this headphone.
What's a rookie go for? $6,000 or something?
But yep, there we go. Nice little PSA 10. Anytime you get a PSA 10, you like it. Hard to come by.
Cost like $50 to get graded, don't they? $30, $20.
So originally, it used to be 20 to send them into PSA is kind of like the name brand, the best one. It's the one that carries the most value.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're getting, it's just like getting anything minted for those that are, I don't know anything about NFTs, but if anyone's involved with NFTs, if you get it minted by a certain spot, it probably has more value than if you get it minted elsewhere, I guess. I don't know. And that's kind of like the best way to describe PSA. It's just the best grading company, most recognized, most credible would be the best way to put it. And
I'm working on an NFT with you, just get you talking about recruiting. And then when it happens, like Dante Moore, I say, hey, here's a NFT of Justice talking about Dante Moore.
One of 10.
Great idea.
One of 10. So yeah, I mean, PSA is good. It's just super hard to get into. It was $25 a card originally, but during quarantine, so many people like myself got into cards that they were sending everything in there. You're only supposed to send the cards that are of value in there, like $150 raw, like a raw card that's worth like 150 plus is kind of like my threshold. Like if it's worth 150 raw, I'm going to consider sending it in. Now my threshold's more like, okay, this card's got to cost like $300-$400 raw, because originally it was 25 and then went up to like 50. Now it's $100 a card to send it in. So there's really no point in sending it in unless it's, unless you're like personally collecting it and you just want to like mint it yourself. But,
well, that's right. Like Gary Grant, my favorite Michigan basketball player of all time. It's probably worth 30. I don't even know if it's worth 10 cents, but drop $100 just to put it in a case.
And then second up, this is just some random one that I have. I don't even know why I have it, but it's a Donovan McNabb rookie card. PSA 10. No idea how I got this. It just ended up in my mail one day. It's uncirculated, so nobody even knows. It says uncirculated right there.
You don't know how much.
You'll see here. It says in it to win it, where this one says uncirculated, because nobody even knows what this is. The PSA did not recognize what this card was. I didn't send this in. I got this from one of the many places I've purchased cards. It just probably came with one of the packs I've gotten, like a complimentary edition or whatever, since I've probably dropped too much money on cards. Yeah, I don't know.
Back to 98 when Syracuse came in Michigan Stadium and McNabb ran this end around and lost his shoe, and he took it like 35 yards to the house. But so that one,
the original shoelaces.
Yeah, that one brings back negative. They could have come to that one brings back negative memories. Tom Brady on the other side. Michigan got blown out in their second game. They started 0-2 after winning the championship. So who knows?
What a time to be alive.
Have you ever sent a card in and it came back with like a 4 or 5? You're like, what?
Well, I actually have never gotten any of my cards graded. I just have purchased ones that are graded. I've been working on putting together a stash to do that, and then PSA came out with this news like 5 or 6 days ago that it's going to charge $100 a card, and it just completely ruined all the strategy I had come up with for what I was going to send in. So now I have to kind of reevaluate, and there's way too much going on to worry about that right now. So, but yeah, you've seen a lot. There's always people that send in a card where they're like, I had a buddy of mine, shout out Coach Cotner at Wyandotte, go Bears. He sent in, I think, like 80, 90 cards plus, and he had his best one was a Shohei Ohtani X-Fractor, which is a rookie variation card that instead of it's just normal, like you'll see this one has like no shine or color to it or anything. It's just a normal card. And then this one has like that shininess, hollowness to it. So this refractor. Refractor. So this card here, it's very similar. That pattern is similar in the X-Fractors. It's totally different company and totally different set and all that, but it is similar where it has like that pattern to it when it glows. And that's what the Ohtani card he had had on it, and that's a very sought after card as an X-Fractor rookie, just because they're very few and far in between. There's only one per box. In the box you get it, in the box you get it is sometimes $200-$300. So he was able to get one. I don't know if he bought it or if he pulled it or whatever it was. And when he sent it in, a PSA 10 of that card is, I don't even know. But he got an 8, and he was very upset with that because the amount of cards being sent into PSA have turned into the price of them going way down once they're graded. So that's kind of where it's at right now, is if you get a PSA 8, it better be like a Kobe or a retro card. But that X-Fractor of a PSA 10, I'm looking at it right now, the one that he had. So this is why he wanted one. One just sold for $17.50. So
$17.50. I'll give him that for it.
Now $1,750.
Oh.
So
I'm afraid I've got one card just that I know it is worth money, but I'm afraid to send it in because if it ends up with like a 6 or something, I think it's going to be like $100. But if it was a 7, it starts bumping up, and I'm hoping that it would be like an 8 or 9. Then I'm thinking, woo! But so I'm afraid I can't tell myself. So I just keep it up and sitting there, and I never look at it. And
what card is it?
It is the Magic Bird Julius Erving rookie card. It's
my gosh!
It's supposed to be like the golden goose of all cards when it comes to basketball cards, besides the Jordan one. Holy Grail is the word I was looking for there.
Yeah, there you go, dude. A six in that card is still worth a lot, though.
Yeah, I'm just afraid to send it in because it looks good to me, but I can't tell. I've showed it to a couple of my friends, and the one guy's like, "Yeah, you'll be lucky if that's a 7."
There's always those guys who have it all figured out with the grades.
Yes. And he looked at it pretty quick. I sent him a picture of it. He's like, "Yeah, you'll be lucky if that's a 7." But then he was offering me $1,000 for it. So
look at that. Funny how that works, right?
Yeah, funny. Yeah, he'll be sending it in. All right, great stuff. I want to wish Acuna a Merry Christmas, and everybody have a great couple days here. I hope you take a couple of days off. After last week, man, you and Henschke, you guys need a little bit of a break, and
Henschke hasn't hit any breaks. I've been slow to the punch this week. I've just been kind of wore out, but Josh is a machine that never stops, so credit to him.
Yeah, well, Henschke, when he's not on the Den, he's like somewhere else on some kind of media, taking pictures of himself of downtown Ann Arbor or wherever else. So he is a machine. That's a good way to put him.
He's active, that's for sure.
Machine. All right. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Thanks.
Merry Christmas, everyone.